my end
Yeah.
here.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to a very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, burning in the scorching Los Angeles sun where we are full of sheeple. Anyhow, this show is literally 5 years in the making. It's a long story why. Many of you know why I was off air for 2 years. But Mr. Dolan, my dear friend, I had a chance to first interview him literally over 8 years ago. That's how far time flies. 8 years ago, I believe it must have been May of 2013. Anyhow, we also had a great bonding experience on the way home from Travis Walton's house when I drove you back, if you recall. So without further ado, the one and only Mr. Richard Dolan. Richard, welcome, dear friend.
Hey, Dr. J, John, great to be on your show here. And I was thinking when exactly we did that long car ride, and it was 2013. I think that sounds about right. And it was a long to LA from where the heck did we start?
It was from Snowflake to Los Angeles.
To Los Angeles, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, 2013 was the first interview. It was 2015 because that was the anniversary of Travis Walton.
Oh, so we did the ride in 2015?
Yeah, we did it 2 years after we'd already been friends. Yeah, but it's not like we didn't hang out and go to the drinks and go to the events together anyway. But that was the 9, 10, 11-hour ride. But we had a blast.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Alex, by the way, thank you so much. I see your super chat already. I appreciate it. Everybody else, if you have super chat questions, I will ask them during the show. Otherwise, please wait till the end. Now, Richard Dolan, as you know, has written several books. My personal favorites are some of the first ones, National Security, the National UFOs and National Security State. There was one great hypothetical book, which I don't think is hypothetical anymore. It's called AD, After Disclosure. Now, I know we're going to talk about more things today, but I consider this AD3 or AD4. AD1 to me happened December 2017 when New York Times released those 3 videos. And then, of course, was confirmed by the Pentagon. And then everybody, if you recall my interview with Lou Elizondo, that's the closest you're going to get to an official government official saying, look, we don't know where they're coming from. They're coming from outer space, inner space, another dimension, but they're not from here. So, Richard, what's your opinion about, do you think we're actually after disclosure?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't see it that way. And it's funny because when I co-wrote that book in 2010, I can honestly say, like, I would absolutely have expected there to have been some kind of disclosure moment after something like the New York Times did their piece. Like, in other words, back in 2010, if someone had said to me, yes, the New York Times is going to do 2 big pieces on the reality of UFOs in a few years, I would have thought, wow, okay, this could easily trigger the avalanche. Which is what Bryce Zabel and I really wrote a lot about in that book, was essentially an avalanche effect following some major announcement. Of course, our scenario is an announcement from the United States president. That's a lot bigger than the New York Times.
Yeah.
But even so, the New York Times is big. That's like America's Pravda. Like, they are the establishment voice of what you're supposed to believe. And so, but it didn't happen. What we've had a steady rollout of a little more of a trickle. It's been, excuse me, it's been very important. It's been very interesting. So there's a lot new information publicly that we'll talk about in terms of UFOs. We're able to have a public conversation in kind of a mainstream venue on UFOs where that really wasn't possible more than 5 years ago. But what hasn't happened is, like, there's been what I often call a red line. And no one's gone over that red line. So to me, one of the big red lines is an acknowledgement of crash retrievals of UFOs that is holding technology. And a couple of people, you mentioned Lou Elizondo. Lou is one of the people who's walked right up to that line.
Yes.
In fact, he actually said, famously on Tucker Carlson a couple of years ago, that there were recovered UFOs. And then that interview ended and no one else followed up.
Are you referring to when they had the story where it said we have off-world vehicles not from this earth recovered, and then the next day, boom, they removed that entire phrase?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. That the phrase "not of this earth" makes me think of the Eric Davis notes on Admiral Thomas Wilson, which I talked a lot about over the last few years. And I was talking about Davis's interview on Carlson from May 31st, 2019, where he's on for about 5 minutes, and at the very end, Carlson says, "So have we recovered these?" And he said aircraft, but he meant really UFOs.
Yeah.
And Elizondo at first said, "Well, Tucker, my NDAs prevent me from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." But long pause, in a word, yes. And the interview ended. I thought that was a huge thing. And there was just no follow-up on from anyone else to Elizondo. And then Eric Davis, who I just mentioned, has also, he's not an official government figure. He's a scientist with high-level classified security clearances. Eric Davis also has been very explicit in a couple of interviews about the reality of acquisition of ET tech. So he's talked about it. So we've gone much further, but it hasn't proceeded, and there hasn't been an official acknowledgement. And I would go further and say that everything that we have seen so far, I would say it's not impossible for it to be walked back, even now. Like you'd think, there's too much information that's come out there, but I'm not sure. I think it's entirely possible that we can be looking at a walking back of even what's been acknowledged.
I'm glad you mentioned the crash UFOs. First of all, Preston Dennett and I have been saying this privately for years, and then almost every time he's appeared on the show. We, the people, have the right to go see this Roswell wreckage in a museum. And I did ask that question about, crashed, I don't know if you want to call them saucers because they're all sorts of shapes. I asked that to Mr. Elizondo. And just like you said, his non-disclosure would prevent him. He just said, I did ask that, and I'm going to leave it there. But the way, it's ironic because the way he interviewed, or when I had him on, and I went pretty deep with him, there were things that he didn't say, which were almost just as important as things he did say. Now, yeah, I think right now we do have some sort of disclosure in the sense of like Roswell, when they published in the newspaper, recovered. But we're nowhere near that, obviously, because who are the pilots? That's another thing I asked Elizondo. Have you made contact with them? Where is all the wreckage, like you mentioned? We're not talking about Roswell. We got Cape Girardeau. We got Texas. There's so many different crashes. And where are the bodies? When are we going to actually meet the pilots themselves? To me, that'll be the fullest day of disclosure. And because government works so slow, I don't know if that's going to happen in our lifetimes.
No, I think, as time goes by, there's a period of excitement that we all felt, I felt, after that first wave of publicity. I think a lot of folks in the UFO field thought, aha, vindication. Yeah. And they had a little bit of times that show off to their family members and friends who were always skeptical for years. And they were able to say, see, aha, we were right. But, and that was fun, but where is it going to go from here is really the question. And there's so many levels. Even, we talk about crash retrievals or even seeing bodies, alien bodies, let's say, but there's, how deep does this whole phenomenon go? Honestly, we don't even know to this day how deep it goes. How long has there been an involvement of other beings with our society? How deep is it today? Are they involved in our society? Is there collaboration between our elites and these other beings, or to what extent is there? These are questions that inevitably would come up, or at least down the road, you would think they would come up. But right now, what we're seeing, unfortunately, between, and I wrote After Disclosure 11 years ago, it was a different world. There was still complete control over the legacy media then as now. That hasn't really changed any. But what has changed since then is complete a revolution by big tech over the thought of the entire world. It's been a global revolution, not just a national revolution in the US. It's been everywhere. And, ramped up, obviously, by the response to COVID. We've seen a worldwide, very swift global revolution. I was just talking about this the other night on one of my programs, and I was comparing, to previous revolutions of the past, like the Bolshevik Revolution or Hitler's seizure of power in 1933 or Mao or any like those. Okay, so those were revolutions that were very fast, very bloody. They were very extreme. They felt extreme. So what we've experienced here in the last year and a half maybe isn't that extreme, but what's different is that this is global. So there's never been a global transformation so rapid as what we're all experiencing now. And I mean, that's actually quite extraordinary, and it's definitely intense. And so I'm bringing this up because that affects UFO disclosure, it seems to me. We're in an era where you're not supposed to believe in conspiracy theories, right? And so what is the biggest of all conspiracy theories? Is the UFO cover-up. What is bigger than that? So I asked myself, are we really going to be allowed as a society to go truly deep into the UFO cover-up? I just don't think so. So what we're seeing is we've had a partial rollout of UFO information. And in fact, my opinions about this have evolved over the last few years, but what I believe currently is that what we've experienced has been the result of a particular faction of very dedicated individuals with some with government intel connections, some without, but they like the ones without, for example, Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean of the New York Times and George Knapp of KLAS TV in Vegas, but then also with the TDSA folks. It seems to me that there are folks who think that this is a coordinated national security CIA rollout, but I believe it's actually more likely that there were a lot of people who were very unhappy about the release of any of this UFO information. And there were groups within the Pentagon and the intelligence field that fought TTSA tooth and nail. So that it seems to me that what we have been seeing is a result of a faction with their own interest, as opposed to someone from Langley or, NSA headquarters or whatever saying, yeah, we're going to roll out a fake UFO disclosure, or a real one for that matter. I don't think that's the case. I think we're seeing a private group. And I think there's a good chance that they're going to be stonewalled or stymied moving forward. It's not a done deal that we're just going to keep moving forward with this. So it can be rolled back. And I hope it isn't. But I think, I just was looking into something with Google. Google has a unit known as Jigsaw. And I just did a live stream on this on my channel 2 nights ago. So what Jigsaw does, their job is to control your mind. So their job is to make the world safe, cyber safe, remove harm from the internet. Nothing could go wrong with that, right? So what Jigsaw did is to pay money to Rand Corporation, which is one of the largest, most important defense think tanks in the U.S., to develop ways of locating and dealing with conspiracy theories on the web. And Rand came up with their own little nifty ideas, basically using linguistic analysis to identify different types of conspiracy-oriented groups. One of the groups that they looked into for this study of theirs were UFO believers. So they've definitely got us in their sights. And what Google's going to do with that information undoubtedly is to improve the algorithms and the ideas that Rand gave them. And they're on top of this whole thing. They're going to be looking at conspiracy theories, and Google will do what they do best, which is shadow ban or deplatform via YouTube and things like that. So I think, acknowledging the reality of UFOs is one thing, and that puts them in a tricky place, because when you acknowledge the reality of UFOs, you're like a hair's breadth from dealing with a cover-up, obviously. But so far, they've managed it well. And I think what we're going to see is Google will chip in on the effort to keep the UFO disclosure from going any further than it has gone. That's what I think. They may win that on that, or they may not win. There's efforts coming in from the side of openness that can still make a difference. So it's not like we have no hope. But I think Google is going to be definitely has been taking sides on this actually for several years.
There's a couple things I want to mention. First of all, you talked about shadow banning. I've been shadow banned. I lost 70,000 followers on Twitter, 40-some thousand on Instagram, and I have no idea how many on Facebook. And something Elon Musk said. when it came to cars, and after all the car accidents where people died because of no seatbelts, it took 10 years for regulations to come out for seatbelts, right? When you're dealing with something this massive, and then you have an oligopoly, right? You got Facebook, Zuckerbucks, as they call them, Dorsey, you got Tim Cook, you got Google, you got Bezos. They control everything as far as what we see in here. And that's kind of sad because they're, like you mentioned, they're trying to let us not have free speech. And as a non-practicing attorney, I can tell you the threat to the Constitution has never, ever been so high as it is right now. I mean, I know every lawyer right now is like screaming in their head, like, where's our First, Second, Fourth, and 10th Amendment? Not to mention the other ones in between that deal with due process, self-incrimination, etc. So I feel that you're absolutely right, Richard, because I don't know if we're ever going to get to the real truth. I don't think they're going to show us the bodies. I don't think they're going to say, hey, these are from Zeta Reticula. These are the serious ones. By the way, avoid the praying mantis. I'm just, making up different species of what they do, but they're not going to do that. I don't know why, but it seems like they're never going to let us know. Now, do you recall what General Eshed said several months back?
Yeah, Hayam Eshed of Israel.
Yeah. What do you think of his claim?
So just to help listeners out, Hayam Eshed is I think he's in his mid to late 80s. He's a retired Israeli defense official and space. He ran their space program, or the equivalent. I can't remember the name of the program, but it was their space program essentially. Yeah. So and he's been in the Israeli defense bureaucracy for many years. So this is a very accomplished man, obviously. Very. And what he said, this is a couple of months ago. Well, a few things. He was like, President Donald Trump, this is when Trump was president, has been briefed on this. He made that statement. He made the statement that UFOs are real, and I think he said to the effect the aliens are here. And then he talked about the Galactic Federation. Mm-hmm. Right. That's what kind of threw me for a loop, to be honest with you. So I don't really know that I believe in a Galactic Federation, or if there is one, I'm not really persuaded that any of us ordinary slobs here on Earth have interest or have knowledge of such a thing. Yeah. It's actually very like new agey kind of California. You're out in LA. You get it a lot, and they would talk about the Galactic Federation of Light frequently. Is very no, maybe it's a real thing. I've just been a bit leery of that concept. So when I heard him mention it, it made me think. He was working off of maybe information that he might have been briefed on, and maybe he was working off of information that he thought was true that he got from other researchers. I mean, that's not unusual. I remember when astronaut Edgar Mitchell was alive, he did a lot of the same things. Like Edgar Mitchell had had knowledge of certain things that he absolutely knew, and he wasn't afraid to express his opinions about things. And I mean, I don't know Hayam Eshed at all. I've never spoken with the man, never communicated, so I'm only guessing. But my guess is that might be a similar thing. He's at an age. Well, I'll just add, he's at an age where it's interesting because you get old enough and maybe you just don't care anymore, right?
Yeah, 86, 87, somewhere along the lines of that. And you're right about the Galactic Federation. I'd like to see more proof of it, especially in Los Angeles. You're right. I hear a lot about that. Well, one of the things that struck me, and I didn't think this was possible, was that aside from humans and aliens working underground in base, he said it was the ETs themselves that didn't want disclosure. Do you think that's a possibility? Because if that's the case, then why would they keep visiting us?
No, I look, whoever these beings are, and it could be one group or multiple groups. I suspect it's multiple groups, actually.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Yeah.
Which I wrote about in my most recent book, The Alien Agendas. I did my own little best attempt to sort of break down the groups that I thought were here and what they were doing. But one thing that's absolutely clear and has been clear for all the history of contact or alleged contact is that these beings are not interested in announcing themselves to the world. They're just not. Now, when you go back through encounters through the centuries, there's all these very interesting stories of contact that people have had. it's hard to know what to make of some of them. Some sound a lot like folklore, and are they alien beings or not? But to the extent that any of those are potentially true, it wouldn't make sense to me that an alien race would want to announce themselves to humans of that era anyway. I mean, we're just very, very primitive. We're basically living in huts and by muscle power. And what really could we do to interact or deal with them?
Yeah.
So there wouldn't be a motivation. Nowadays it's different, but it could be like psychologically, they could be entirely different from us. They could be still much more advanced in certain key technological ways that it just might be more of a hassle than anything else for them to announce themselves to us. And if there's an agenda that is not in our best interest, then absolutely, there's no motivation at all. Why would there be?
I agree. And, we live such a short lifespan. It's like right when we get wise, we start to die off. And that's kind of sad. I would think that someone looking from the outside in would probably be like, well, they're too immature. Let's wait till they're 70, 80, etc. Then we'll have meaningful communication, and then boom, they're gone. And I remember something Wendell Stevens said something too years ago, that the reason why we are visited so much by so many different species is because we have a warm climate. We're very close to our sun, and because of that, that gives us a peculiarly short lifespan, but at the same time allows us to have the diversity of all the life on Earth. Did you ever hear that? And if so, what's your opinion on that?
I didn't hear that from Wendell Stevens. That's interesting. I don't know how that would affect the duration of a typical lifespan. It's not something I've ever studied, so I can't say yes or no to that, but yeah, maybe. But in terms of, I mean, I've often and assumed actually that any alien species that's not from here would love to examine Earth because of the unbelievable genetic diversity we have on this planet. I mean, this is a planet that is just overflowing with life everywhere. And, especially if you're a race that knows how to manipulate genetics, or if that's something that could be of interest to you. I mean, my goodness, Earth offers so many unique genetic combinations, different life forms. Yeah, you got to have a field day coming here just playing with playing Frankenstein with all of the species that are here, including the human beings, for all we know. But there would definitely be a motivation for that. And plus, with other resources, water, maybe there's water abundant everywhere else, but we have a lot of water, lots of water. That's important. I mean, our planet's covered, 75% of it's covered by water.
That's right.
And then we've got heavy minerals, which are certainly useful, maybe. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things here that would be of interest to any spacefaring or dimensional traveling group of entities that can get here.
It's ironic you mentioned the minerals. Not too far from me in the Salton Sea, they just found a vast amount of lithium deposits. And as you know, that's very high in demand for lithium ion batteries. So, yeah, I mean, right. We have lots of minerals here on this planet and the old writings, didn't the Anunnaki want gold?
Well, that's according to Sitchin. So I don't know. I'm not the biggest follower of Zecharia Sitchin. I find him interesting, but my jury is out on him. I'm actually not. There's the problem I have with Sitchin, honestly, is that he reads the Sumerian mythology literally. In other words, this ancient Sumerians had a mythos about these gods, which they call the Anunnaki. And apparently, according to Sitchin, they said the Anunnaki were here about 500,000 years ago. Okay, fine. But that doesn't mean that it's literally true.
Yeah.
First of all, the ancient Sumerians had no conception of how ancient human civilization was. In fact, no ancient society had a conception of that. As far as we can tell, you look at the historical record, there's no sense of an ancient history at all. Zero. And so for the Sumerians to talk about Anunnaki being here 400 or 500,000 years ago or whatever, in my opinion, there's absolutely no way they could possibly know such a thing at all. And so it's just a story. And Sitchin, though, took it, seems to me, as literal truth. And it's just not something that I believe. Now, I'm not going to say that we haven't been tampered with, because I actually believe we have. In fact, that's something else I wrote about in my last book. I think there's at least a case. It might be a weak case for all I know, but there's at least a little bit of a case. You might speculate that we were manipulated 45, 50,000 years ago. We have our own genetic modifications and changes in our brain structure that happened around that time. So it's possible, and that coincides with our creative explosion of artwork and tools and things like that. So I think that's actually possible. But what Sitchin was proposing, the Anunnaki coming here for gold, all of that.
Slave race.
I have nothing. There's nothing that I can say that makes me think, yeah, I think that was true. I just think that.
I'm the black sheep of my family because they're all skeptics. Up until recently, they're becoming more open-minded. And when I explained to them, hybridization, they said that's not possible. And I said, well, look at dogs. You take two different species of dogs, and before you know it, there you got a mutt. So if we have a creature that is very similar to us, say 99 or 98% similar DNA, who's to say that you can't cross that and create a third creature? So, I mean, I think it's not as hard as people think it is.
No, totally not. This has been an argument for a long time. Even UFO researchers, once the whole abduction phenomenon became a topic of discussion really in the 1980s, there are lots of arguments among UFO researchers, like hybridization's impossible. No, it's not impossible. They went back and forth, this is 40 years ago. So it's not a new argument. But I think, with CRISPR technology, gene modification, look, I think we're all at the point where we can see, an interspecies hybridization, I think, is absolutely a possibility. It probably is happening covertly, but I see no reason why that can't be the case, and why you can't have now hybridization between a native Earth species and a non-Earth species. Presumably, that's what aliens are. That could be a lot more of a tricky process, but there might be ways around it that we just aren't aware of. There might be ways of splicing in certain qualities that they have into our people, or certain qualities that we have into theirs. I can't see that as impossible at all.
Some people argue that our DNA has, I don't know if you want to call it a code, but something embedded in our DNA, which is like a roadmap. Can you expand on that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Not sure I do. I'm not sure that I can. I don't know if I know what you mean.
So some people claim that we have some sort of code that's embedded in our DNA, and I guess down the line, someone will unlock that, and it'll either unlock all our capabilities, or it'll understand where we came from.
I mean, there's been people who've talked about etheric strands of DNA. There's theories that, our DNA, our maybe something in our junk DNA or other aspects of our DNA have been locked away from us, preventing us from developing greater capabilities. Yeah, I've heard that many times. I don't really think I believe that. When I think of junk DNA, for example, my understanding is that, when a species goes through a process of evolution, it's not like rewriting software.
Yeah,
it's not like you delete the old code and just add something new. No, like old parts of the DNA are no longer being used, and they will shut off, and new structures new alleles and new genes and things like that will appear, and so the old DNA basically just gets switched off, or supposedly, and that becomes junk DNA. There's probably a lot more to it that I'm not aware of, so I can't pretend that I've got the final answer. But in terms of us being switched off, look, it's actually possible. I can't say it's impossible. I just don't really have the science to say this is what I think.
Bob Lazar, in his briefing documents, read that we had undergone 63 external corrections. Some people, including the late Roger Lear, who I was very close to because he lived not far from me, and I was present at the last surgery before, sadly, he died. He believes that we are undergoing our 64th external correction, creating Homo noeticus as opposed to Homo sapien. Do you think that it's possible that we've already had 63 and we're undergoing our 64th, or what's your take on that?
I forgot about that with Lazar. Yeah. Well, I do think that we're going through a major civilizational and biological transformation right now. Like, I think that's absolutely happening. Now, when he was talking about corrections, I assume you mean artificial modifications.
Updates. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know of scientific evidence to support that, but I wouldn't know how to look into that. I would say, however, like, we as a species, you know, we have the history that we understand about ourselves at this point is, roughly speaking, you know, we evolved from earlier forms of hominid, and for the last 300,000 years or so, we've existed basically as human beings like this. But we were different 300,000 years ago. We were different 200,000 and 100,000 years ago, and even 10,000 years ago. And the difference was that we lived as hunters and gatherers, and therefore we had actually larger brains than we have now. We had much greater muscle definition. We had denser bones. Basically, if we were to stand up next to our ancestors of that era, we would probably be embarrassed to be look like they would be bigger, stronger, more athletic, and have larger brains. And we would not be able to survive in their world, probably definitely. But what happened is that starting around 10,000 years ago, we went through a process of agricultural development, and we basically settled down as farmers. That's the first time, as far as anyone can see, that we did that. And that began a process of evolution, change biologically to us. So our brains got smaller a bit because we didn't need a lot of the brain power that our hunters and gatherer ancestors did need. And other changes happened as well. And not just us, but all the animals we domesticated. You look at the sheep, wild sheep, and
right.
Well, probably with horses. Definitely, I know with sheep, the modern sheep that we've domesticated have a brain that's like a third smaller than sheep in the wild.
Wow.
They're docile, and they're just different. They're different animals. We change them. Dogs, you mentioned earlier, you know, every dog that exists came from the wolf. And so we've gone through this whole process. All of this only in like 10, 15,000 years with dogs. That's it. So change is going on constantly, and we are no exception. So now we're going through a period, I think, where our civilization is fundamentally changing. You know, the technologies that we have, and I do suspect strongly, in fact, I think there's a lot of evidence to show that human beings are undergoing very rapid biological changes in these last few generations, a very fast rate of change. So we're moving into something different. Yeah. But whether that's by design or by what I'll sometimes say default, you know, is some organization or intelligence directing this, or does this happen because of the nature of our biological response to the infrastructure we've created? You know, it's definitely some part the latter. It could be most or even all, but there could be, I can't rule out that there's an intelligence directing some of this.
I'm going to ask you a question about humans as a whole. First of all, have you ever heard of the fourth turn?
The fourth turning?
Yeah, I guess that could be it.
Right, I think it's the fourth turning. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with that. Not expert.
That difficult times breed strong people breed good times, times breed.
And I think the cycles go for 80 years, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, prior to, first of all, the last major 80-year thing was World War II. Prior to that, Civil War. Prior to that, Revolutionary War. Well, it could be argued the 80s and 90s were really good times, and those born post-2000 are the weak generation that's going to set us off into this difficult time. How do you think that's going to affect disclosure or people just believing it in general? Do you think, what's your take on that?
I think the fourth turning, yes, an interesting idea. I'll just tell you, I have my own idea, which I think looks at a grander picture than the fourth turning. So in my book, The Alien Agendas, I introduced an idea which I call the fourth stage of humanity. And so I just mentioned the hunter-gatherer stage that we had for most of our existence. And then in the last 10,000 years, we develop agriculture, which creates really the next stage, a stage 2. So that gives us our first towns and cities. That gives us all the inventions like the wheel and metallurgy and pottery and everything from ancient Egypt to the Roman Empire to the Italian Renaissance, all of that's stage 2. That's basically us harnessing animals to create civilization. But then there was a stage 3, which just happened a couple of 100 years ago. You can call it the scientific and industrial revolution, starting, in the 17th century, 18th century, and then really picking up steam, let's say after the American Civil War, where things start really getting kind of crazy. Railroads and then the telegraph and the telephone and airplanes and cars and
smartphones,
radios and all of all of that fast. You think about the last 150 years, how rapid that transformation's been. So now I believe so that's stage 3. That's what we were all born into. But I think we're moving into stage 4, which best name I could think of at the moment is let's call it the transhumanist stage. But it's a lot more than just transhumanism. It's an interconnected digital world, essentially a totalitarian digital world where everything is data crunched, everything is monitored. With 5G being rolled out over the next few years, you'll have smart devices that will monitor every single element of your life. There will be no privacy. And in fact, people are now growing up without an expectation of privacy. You have people putting themselves out there on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and whatever. Like no one even wants their privacy. But it's changing. I think it will change human psychology, and it will on top of that, we'll see what economists talk about. They call the robo-apocalypse. It's the Terminator coming to take your job. There's just going to be more people than there will be very likely viable jobs for them.
Yes.
There will be total surveillance. There'll be, increasingly toxic food, toxic news, toxic entertainment, greater levels of neuroses developing, mental illnesses. I think we're seeing all of that. So it's a transformation of our world into basically, we're 10 years behind China in terms of a social credit system and things like that. So I think that will cause a dramatic transformation of human society, psychology, and physiology, basically turning us into a big giant anthill. In other words, we're turning ourselves into the aliens that we've been investigating all this time, the basically Borg mentality. I know it sounds bleak. I would love for someone to talk me out of it, but that's what I see happening. So to me, that's a much bigger thing than the fourth turning that author, and I cannot remember his name, that he talks about. 80-year cycles, I'm looking but much more long-term than that. And I think the transformation that I see happening right now, which the COVID lockdowns and the COVID response, all of that is speeding up that entire transition. It's definitely jacked that up into high gear. So we're transforming ourselves into something dramatically different, and where we're going to come out of, if people can resist successfully, then great. I think I would like to see more resistance, frankly, but that seems to be the direction we're moving. And so in that world where information increasingly will be totally controlled, I was just talking about Google's Jigsaw division and the Rand Corporation and killing conspiracy theories, like that's the world we're moving into. So I think we're at this, as some politicians call it, inflection point. We're at an inflection point where we can go one way or another. And if we're successfully able to prevent this from happening, we could have we could have a reprieve and we can have genuine freedom. And in that case, we might be able to have a more meaningful disclosure of whatever the truth about the deep UFO problem is. But if we don't get that, it could be game over, frankly. And it could be a situation where the information is so controlled, population so dumbed down, the information is so controlled, that could be the end of the road. And
that's
any
scary.
disclosure could just be completely controlled and it roll out.
Yeah, and that's a very, very scary thought. Now, while I have yet to interview Edward Snowden, we've been communicating with me and his lawyer. I've interviewed multiple times Bill Binney, the original NSA whistleblower. And for any of you out there listening, if you haven't heard that, just check out my channel. There are multiple interviews with him.
That man is a hero.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? And he said, 15 years or so longer before Snowden, that these things are always listening and watching you. You got a smart TV, you can bet it's watching and listening to you. Your laptop, your iPad, all of it. Okay, I'll give you an example. A friend would come over. We'd be talking about something that we probably would have never mentioned. He'll go home, turn on his own phone into YouTube, even though we have totally different interests. All of a sudden, what I said is all of a sudden a suggested video on his YouTube. That is scary.
We hear this all the time. Everyone listening probably said, "Oh yeah, I remember when that." Yeah, everyone.
And it's just increasing. It's so much more blatant that they're listening, and you're right. I do fear that we're going to either go one way or the other, because the totalitarianism is really right around the corner. You mentioned China, the social score, all of that seems to be unraveling here. Which honestly, Mr. Dolan, I never ever expected that I would see this in my lifetime. I remember in the 80s, if you called someone a communist, it was so offensive that you would get smacked. Now they're embracing it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the culture has changed dramatically. The infrastructure, the technological infrastructure allows for a, I think communism is really not the word that I'm afraid of. It's totalitarianism, because that's just simply total control, total information control. Communism can be totalitarian. It is by its very nature. But I think what we're moving toward is not exactly communism per se, like in the style of the old Bolsheviks or Mao, but it is one of state centralized control. Yeah. I think we're moving to the current China model, which is, we talk about China as communist, but honestly, they often are better capitalists than the West these days. So they have total control over their society, but they have a tremendous ability to have their own version of crony capitalism, and they can make their own money within their system. They're incentivized to make money there these days. So that's not communism. whatever that is, there's something different. And I think that's the model.
Capitalist / communism.
I think that's the model that the world is moving towards. So it's, in other words, total. Western governments, they drool over what China's doing. They want it. They want more of that. Look at Australia. Boy, Australia had a good run, but that run is over. Look at Canada. Ditto. Canada had a good run once upon a time. The United States and Europe, the levels of control. The U.S., as bad as it is here, and it is bad, is, from what I can glean, is not as bad in terms of draconian totalitarian control quite yet as what we're seeing in some of these other places, but we're right in there. It's bad here, definitely. I don't want to minimize it. So we're moving toward a totalitarian kind of a digital control over everyone's life.
I know what Moore's law is, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure you heard the news that the big tech is no longer hiring college grads, but hiring straight from high school, because based on Moore's law, you're obsolete in those 4 years you go to college. Now,
I did not hear that.
Yeah, it's brand new. Apple, Facebook, Google, literally, they want you straight 17-year-old from high school, because by the time you're 21, 22, you're obsolete.
Well, what that tells us? How absolutely ridiculous our university system has become.
Oh, it's so bad.
It's just proof right there.
I agree with you. Especially now they're removing things like basic math, because it's hard for certain people.
That's Oregon, I believe, right? Yes, state of Oregon.
That's so disgusting, because
cringy, embarrassing.
Yeah, and I got to deal with it, because I got a 5-year-old goddaughter here. And she's just started kindergarten, so it's gonna be very eerie to watch the next several years. Now, based on Moore's law, you have Elon Musk's Neuralink. What do you think the idea of us merging with AI and becoming sentient beings, or as other people have said, like Father Jack Ashcroft, who said that AI, David Adair, when I last had him on, we talked about AI, said that AI will kill us. They want to kill us. They've already, in testing, multiple computers created their own language to communicate with each other where we can understand. One of the final messages before they unplugged it was that we humans are in their way. Let's eliminate that threat. So do you think we're going to go towards the direction of accepting AI and, getting to the singularity and ultimately merging with it? Or do you think that this already is AI. It says, it's very low level AI. It doesn't think for itself, but based on algorithms and things we say and do, it remembers. But what do you think as far as, like the robot Sophia?
Yeah.
Are we all going to become that?
So you mentioned Musk and the Neuralink.
Yeah.
It's called BCI, brain computer interface.
Yeah.
And they're all about that. In fact, there's another company that I think that's leaped over Musk's company to even have a better version of that. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a lot of people competing in this. And this is, as far as what David Adair said to you, killing it, I don't know about that, but what it will, it could, and it definitely, look, the way that they're promoting it, like you knew they were going to promote it, like it could help people who've got paralysis, or it could have people with this disability or that disability. And all right, maybe not, but that's how they're going to promote it. But the thing is this: so if it allows you to download information, let's say from the cloud or from the web, then obviously the communications are going to go two ways. So whatever comes down goes out as well, and that would give presumably some group access to your thoughts,
Amazon,
emotions,
right? Like Alexa. There are, and that's what I fear. Okay.
So that's one thing. So
yeah.
Let me just, I want to continue, because this is an interesting thing for me as well. I mean, in terms of AI, look, you could say this about AI, you could say this about 5G or 6G, you could say this about a lot of the technologies we're looking at, CRISPR technology. The thing is, there's almost no way to stop the development of these. There's too much at stake. So that means economically and militarily, both of those. For example, we have people who are very upset about the rollout of 5G due to health concerns. Totally legit. I have those concerns as well. There's others of us who are concerned about the rollout of 5G due to privacy concerns. That's even a bigger concern for me. But none of that's going to matter, because the United States military must have 5G, because that gives them a certain edge over previous technology, and they know that the Chinese are working on 5G. So that's better communication, it's better bandwidth. And so it's a military necessity. So nothing is going to stop that. Same with economic benefit. You've got nations, you've got organizations, institutions all competing with each other. And they all know, like, if this group over here is going to roll out 5G, we can't get left behind. So everyone's doing it. And it's the same with AI. It's the same with genetic modification, and all of these technologies have taken on a life and like their own momentum. So I don't see how to stop it. 20 plus years ago, there was a guy named Bill Joy, who was one of the founders of Sun Microsystems. And he was one of the early people talking about, like, the dangers of the singularity. Like saying, look, people, we got to stop this, because the machines are going to take over. We're going to lose our sovereignty as a species. We can't. And everyone looked around and like, what the hell do you expect us to do, man? We can't stop this. If we stop it, someone else is going to do it. And that's absolutely the case. This is a runaway train. So as far as where we're going to go with the singularity, I've been hearing a number of AI experts like not really love the phrase singularity, because it doesn't have there's a lot of ways that super advanced artificial intelligence can look. One way is, like you were mentioning, I think it was a Facebook experiment where the algorithms are talking to each other, and the people studying it were like, what the hell are these things talking about? They're creating their own language. I didn't hear about the kill all humans part, by the way. That I didn't remember. But the fact is, advanced AI could develop its own consciousness. That's possible, I suppose. But it's also possible that even if it doesn't develop a kind of awake consciousness that we have, it's still not impossible for an advanced AI to completely dominate our civilization in ways that we just can't imagine or control. I mean, as it is right now, look how dependent we are on electricity. You pull electricity and we all die. That wasn't the case 100 plus years ago, 150 years ago. People didn't need electricity to live. They knew how to live without it. Now we're dependent. And it's going to be the same with AI. AI is embedded in all of like our phones. It's embedded in all of the processes and software that companies use to keep the world running. And it's only going to become more and more sophisticated to the point where human operators are just not going to be able to, we won't be able to control it. We may already have reached that point for all I know. But so we're going to have a very strong dependence on AI in a way that, it's just going to transform our world in ways that like people like you and me probably look at it with dread. I look at it with dread. But, the crazy thing is that, future generations may not. Like they'll look at it and think, what the hell were those old timers all worried about? Like I can be a celebrity millionaire in this VR environment. I can just live in 24/7. Be like Cypher in the Matrix, eating his little fake steak, talking to Agent Smith. And maybe everyone will be like that in the future. They'll be like Cypher, just saying, yeah, well, I'll take the blue pill.
Not me. Stick me with the red pill. And I'm like you. I fear AI. I know some people don't like the term singularity, but there has to be a point where AI has the equivalent IQ of us and then finally surpasses us. Right. That's what scares me. And what you said about Neuralink, you're absolutely right. It is a two-way road. Sure, it's going to help with strokes, addictions, other things that Elon Musk said. But what about your thoughts? Where are they going to go? And what are they going to do with them? Create more algorithms? I don't know. I just don't want that chip implanted in my head. And
well, this is why I call it the fourth stage of humanity. And it's a really fundamental biological transformation, I think, that we're looking at that is going to redefine even what human beings are. I mean, there have been transhumanist apostles for many decades, even before people like Ray Kurzweil was writing his books, 20, 25 years ago. And all of these people, like I'm somewhat familiar with them. They all scare me to death. I mean, it's basically this situation where no one wants to be a human being. Like they want to live forever, or at least for 500 years. They want perfect health for 500 years.
Yeah.
To do what? Actually, to do what? Like that's the thing we like to tell ourselves is, oh, well, my goodness, there's so much learning we can do. Well, look around you, man. How many people really spend all their time learning as opposed to just goofing around? And like, what will they do? Remember that movie, the Matt Damon film, Elysium?
Oh, yes. Where the rich people are on off planet and
the super elite
Yeah.
Live off world. And what are they? I think this movie really captured it. They're total degenerates. They're like, they just, all they want is a thrill.
Yeah.
They can't buy a thrill. They're trying to buy a thrill. They just more and more. And so and I think you live long enough, how easy will it be to maintain your sanity after living for 200 or 300 years? People probably just lose their mind. I don't think we're designed for that, in other words. So these people who are the transhumanists, like Kurzweil, he's one of the scariest people around. He's brilliant. I mean, I've read many of his books, but he just terrifies me. But it's like no one wants to be a human being. Mm-hmm. They want to be superhuman. And this goes for the UFO group. Remember back in 2012, we were leading up toward the ascension moment.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Do I remember?
Kind of like a mass cultural death wish in a way, like it was like dying and going to heaven. Was that ascension? Well, it's like this basic dissatisfaction with being a normal human being that is born. You nurse at your mother's breast, you grow up with your family, you get older, you get married, you have kids, you grow old, and you die. Like and people don't want that. They want to live forever. They want to rock and roll all night and party every day. And that's the dream of the transhumanist, it seems to me. And it's just not a dream that I share.
It's also a dream that seems to be affecting the people who are younger. You and I work for a living, and I can't imagine if I didn't work. Like, it would affect me in my mind too. I'd feel so undervalued that I didn't contribute to society. I just can't imagine a world where I didn't have those responsibilities.
It's every society. I believe this since I was in my 20s. I thought about this a lot. I think every society has a kind of iron law in which a society will produce the kinds of personalities that it requires for it to maintain itself. So, like, for example, if we lived 1,000 years ago, all right, in some like in ancient, I don't know, China or Europe or anywhere, like we would have different personalities than we do right now. We would not be like we are.
Yeah.
And the reason is because we would not function well in those societies. Chances are we'd be farmers, and you'd have to get up when the sun rises or before, and you'd have to just work all day long. So we'd be tough. We might not have as much of a sense of humor. We wouldn't necessarily be as creative. We would be different kinds of people because we'd have to adapt to the needs of that society. Some societies have required great amounts of creativity. Think of colonial. I remember studying the city of Boston in the colonial American period, 1750. Boston at that time was probably the wealthiest city in the world and had opportunity galore. And so if you lived in Boston back then, you would have on average 5 or 6 careers, professions in your lifetime. So you had to be someone who'd think on your feet. You had to be smart. And the society needed that. And it produced it. Independent thinkers, smart, strong people. Where are we now? Our society, we're moving toward the robo-apocalypse. So that's like a game of musical chairs. I often liken to that, where someone keeps taking chairs out of the room, but there's still the same number of kids there. So they don't all have a chair. And there's some really awful chairs there. So with no opportunity, what are people really going to do with themselves? It seems to me what they'll do is play video games, veg out to virtual reality, augmented reality when that becomes available. Surf the web, look at YouTube, all the time wasting things that are so common now. And it's hard. Like when the opportunity isn't there, I think psychologically it's difficult for people to kind of get themselves into the mindset that our ancestors had, because the opportunities just don't seem to be there, unfortunately.
Now, a lot of people who are abducted are shown, I think, if not everyone, is shown signs of apocalyptic scenes of Earth. Why do you think that is? Is that because we are heading in that direction if we follow this timeline? Or is it if we don't change, that's what's going to happen?
Yeah, I wonder about that. Well, it could be legit or it could be manipulation. So it could be one or the other. It could be a great way to guilt us. Make us feel bad about who we are. But I mean, I have believed that our detonation of nukes did accelerate an interest in our civilization. I mean, it certainly looks like that, right? I mean, I think we'd been under long-standing monitoring, for millennia, but I think with the Second World War, with the technological explosion that happened during World War II, not just nukes, it was everything, then culminating in atomic detonations. That could be very. Look, what we do know is that over the last 70 plus years, UFOs, flying saucers, these objects have been definitely interested in our nuclear technology. There's no getting around that fact. It's happened again and again and again, and that's not coincidence. So there's something about nuclear tech that's important, and that they monitor. Now, they've only on occasion that we know shut down some of our nuclear weapons. For the most part, we've detonated over 2,000 nukes between 1945 and the end of the 20th century, and most of those I don't think they were interfered with by any alien groups. But back to your point, the images of destruction. I think it's very obvious that our civilization is on a collision course with our. I mean, we don't have a stable infrastructure. What we have is not stable. It's amazing, but it could. And as we're seeing now with supply chain interruptions because of COVID, like we've got a very intricately intertwined system where a lot of things can easily go wrong now. Not difficult to imagine that. And the thing about an alien showing scenes of nuclear destruction, you get a lot of people talking about this. The thing that I wonder about is why would an alien show what appears to be just an ordinary person, like just a regular guys and gals who like get abducted, talk about these, and sometimes those accounts end up in UFO books that like a few people read, and that's about it. So like, what if this is the alien plan to warn humanity? it doesn't seem like it's being very effective. Like there's got to be better ways of going about this. Maybe there are, and we're just not aware. But I've often found it a weird thing. Now, the other hand side of it is if you're an invading species and you have an interest in Earth and you have an interest in this ecosystem, and these humans are here and they're kind of in your way, but you really can't wipe them out overtly for whatever reason. What if you wanted to subvert the culture? What if you wanted to make people like lose confidence in who they are and make them feel guilty about even being who they are? And, you know, I mean, the changes that we're going through as a society right now are changes that are designed overtly because we're bad for the earth. We're bad for the environment. And so that's a very good justification to bring in totalitarian rule and control, and basically to guilt humanity into feeling shitty about being a human being.
Yeah.
So I have wondered from time to time if that's a game that they're playing and just a little bit of psych warfare on us. But the truth is, I don't know the answer to it, because in my opinion, the reality is we can easily bring ourselves to the point of destruction. It's not an impossibility at all. We all, you know, I think we realize that. So, so I don't know. I mean, I haven't had a conversation with an alien about this to ask. I would like to ask.
And we do know that we've almost annihilated ourselves multiple times via nukes because of what we saw as UFOs. Also, I just recently found out, not that long ago, you probably know this, during the Trinity test, the very first atomic bomb, there was a disc above the mushroom cloud watching it.
Paola Harris's and Jacques Vallée's recent book.
Yeah, I mean,
Trinity.
And it doesn't surprise me, of course, because, you know, I would think that the moment we detonated, it basically, like you said, it was, you know, the children found the matches. Let's start paying more attention.
I think that's a good book. I think actually, I mean, it's tough to make a perfect case because we're talking 1945. It's not, you know, I think the witnesses are now all dead. When Paola was interviewing them, though, one of them I think was alive. Yeah, I mean, actually, that's considering the span of time that's elapsed between then and now. I must say, and I think Paola has to get the lion's share of this credit. You know, Jacques Vallée is the bigger name, but Paola Harris really has been on this for so long that the two of them, she particularly, put together as good a case as I could imagine that there was a recovery of something as early as 1945 by the U.S. Army.
And also Cape Girardeau, Missouri in 1941.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That seems to me like a very credible case.
It's a good, and Charlotte Mann is a lady who's talked about that. I've had many conversations with Charlotte. She's a very wonderful human being. So she's the one connection we have to the Cape Girardeau case. And her grandfather, she learned about this from her grandmother, who got it from her husband, Charlotte's grandfather, who was a reverend. Who told his wife that he was brought into this event where there was all these other police and FBI, I think, and maybe military, but it wasn't a coordinated response like you got in later years. So it was everything was kind of willy-nilly. And so this local reverend was brought in to perform last rites on alien beings. And this is what he told his wife, and this is what the grandmother told Charlotte. Charlotte's very adamant about it.
Didn't he have a photograph? I believe Paul Blake Smith told me that the Reverend, had a photograph. One of the reporters held up.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And apparently it was taken or something.
That's right. And that photograph has been sort of copied and modeled on by a lot of other fake versions of that photograph. So it's a picture of two tall human men, like sheriff. And they've got this little alien, like a little gray alien with big black eyes, slanted eyes. What exists is a drawing based on that photograph. I think Charlotte may have drawn that, actually. But anyway, that's a drawing based on that photograph. That's all we've got. We don't have the picture. But there have been variations of that circulate around on the web.
Yeah, I actually had to show Michael Schratt and Paul Blake Smith, both of them, a bunch of those fakes, and say, do any of them look real? And they said, absolutely not. None of these are real.
I don't think so.
Now, let me ask you about UFO landings. Do you think they're on the rise? I mean, we have obviously in the 90s Zimbabwe. I remember also in the 90s somewhere in Russia at a park.
30 years ago. Yes, Voronezh, that was 1989.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe was 94. The thing is, where we've been hearing a lot less about crash retrievals and even landings in the last few decades.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to check, because the sources I like to look into for these types of things, one is the National UFO Reporting Center. It's run by Peter Davenport.
Yep.
New Fork. And then the other is the MUFON database, which I don't have ready access to because I'm not a MUFON investigator. But those are the two big digital databases in North America for these types of things. I don't see a lot of landing cases on the National UFO Reporting Center. But what I do get a lot of, particularly, I'm still a big reader of Filer's Files by George Filer, retired U.S. Air Force major.
Yeah.
What a great guy he is. He's I don't know what we'll do when he no longer does Filer's Files, frankly, because he gets people from all over the world writing to him every week. And he puts out a lot of really fascinating UFO sightings and news. But what you get with his reports, I've noticed anyway, is a lot of low craft that people see in the dead of night all over the world. So I don't know about landing, but very low, very quiet, very stealthy. There's a lot of that, I think, that's being reported every week around the world.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Preston Dennett's not the most recent book, but the one prior to that is called UFOs and the Drive-In. I'm like, what?
I'm a big fan of Preston Dennett's work.
Yeah. He's a neighbor of mine. If you recall, he was my original co-host for the first few weeks until I moved to Preston.
I saw him just a couple of months ago in Nevada at a MegaCon there, and I was so glad to meet him in person finally, because I've got a bunch of his books.
Yeah.
I
bet you have UFOs over New York. I bet you have, right?
I do. I've got that. Yeah. I've got like 5 or 6 of his books.
Yeah. Fortunately, because every time he gets a new one, he calls me. I come over and
he cranks them out. But look, they're interesting, and I mean, and what he does, he interviews a lot of people. He gets a lot of direct stories firsthand.
Yeah, he does. And so this entire book that he wrote, the second one, number 28, two books ago, was about UFOs literally flying very slowly and low to the ground, where people are watching movies outside in a drive-in theater. And I couldn't believe that there's that many cases to warrant an entire book. And he says, they're not being stealthy, because obviously all the people in their cars are able to watch them, and they're coming low enough to be just above the screen, sometimes less.
Drive-in theater? Who goes to drive-in theaters? Where are drive-in theaters anymore?
There's none anymore in LA that I know of. It went away in like 90s.
So where? Oh, these are older stories then.
I don't know. I don't think so, because he did reference some modern ones, but
I'd like to know where there's a drive-in theater.
Yeah,
that would be fun.
I'll ask for you next time, or give him a call. I know you have his contact, but he's really fantastic. You're right, because wherever he digs, he finds a lot of information. And if it wasn't for his books, UFOs over California, Nevada, Colorado, I would have never realized the magnitude of crashes and retrievals that we really had. Because that just boggles my mind. Now, go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. In fact, I cite him. This is my latest book, The Alien Agendas. And there we go. I have some of Preston cited here. Some of his work. I talk quite a bit about him in a few cases that I thought were very interesting and worth including for me to make my own points.
That's really cool. You know what? I bet you he probably knows that, because he reads so much. I bet you he already has a copy of that book. What's your take on this? Do you believe we are being visited by extraterrestrials or time travelers, or both? Because Jim Pennison's story really much sounds like time travelers. On the other hand, we have a lot of people that have been told, like for instance, Betty and Barney Hill with the star map, Zeta Reticula 1 and 2. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I guess the short answer is I don't know for certain, but I've always believed that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is still probably the strongest. And I think, for a while, I think people got into this habit of seeing that in opposition to some other theories, like the interdimensional hypothesis, for lack of a better word. As if we actually know like what another dimension would be. Like, can we really even understand that? I wonder.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they're mutually exclusive anyway. I mean, I think if you can come from another world. I mean, it's not difficult now for us to see the likelihood of massive amounts of life elsewhere in the universe, right? I'm rolling up my sleeves. It's warm in this room here. I turned off my air conditioner because I don't want the noise, but it's getting a little warm.
Oh, don't worry, dude, we're getting near there. But I feel your heat because it's hot here. It's 102 outside.
Oh my God! Well, I'm in upstate New York. Not quite as bad, but it's humid. It's hot here too. But back to what we were saying. I think it's most logical, in my opinion, to still assume that there are beings that came from another planet. I mean, it's just the universe is too big. There's too much life that's got to be out there. We ourselves, if you go to NASA today and say, "Hey, are we going to get to go leave the solar system anytime soon?" They'll probably laugh. But then if you say, "Well, what about the next century or two?" and they might say, "Well, actually, we've got some ideas on that." So we can envision ourselves going to another star system, if not ourselves physically. Then through some kind of avatar system, absolutely, like that's totally possible. And so I think and then plus if we understand how to do even a little bit of what's called space-time metric engineering. This is a paper by Hal Puthoff from about a decade ago, essentially manipulating space-time to some extent. Talk about the equations of Miguel Alcubierre from the 1990s, where you can create a warp field like out of Star Trek. You shrink space in front of you, you extend it behind you, create like a little space-time bubble over your craft.
Yeah, like a Alcubierre warp bubble, right?
Correct. Now, the problem with that was that the amount of energy, according to his equations, to do that would be just literally impossible. But I think there was ways around it. And you've got guys like Eric Davis and Jack Sarfati. I remember listening to them talk about possible ways of cheating, as it were, but like it actually could be possible. So maybe that's what they're doing. And if we figure that out, for us to go to other stars may not be all that difficult in another century or two. If we're not already doing it covertly, who knows? But I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility. And if it's possible for us, then I have to assume someone else has already figured out a way to get here.
Absolutely, especially if they're ahead of us, or let's just say they didn't start the way we did, which is burning chemicals to create propulsion. What if their first step, like Bob Lazar said, was element 115 and creating gravity?
If you can find a stable isotope of that. We haven't been able to do that.
I know, at least what we're told, right? Anyway, there's a question here for you if you see it on the screen. It's from James K. Where does Dolan see us going in the next 2 years?
I didn't see the question, so thanks for reading it.
No problem.
Well, I don't think we're going to have. We're not going to have President Joe Biden giving us disclosure on UFOs. I think we can rule that out. And I actually don't think that we'll have an admission of crash retrievals of UFOs. I don't think we'll have that. Although we have this kind of halfway. I mean, there's been a recognition of things like the metamaterial that people have been talking about.
Yeah.
Hal Puthoff gave a very interesting speech on that a couple of years ago. But what I'm expecting is that all of those hints that we've received are going to be walked back. So I actually believe, unless like researchers, like people like us, people who care, are able to break through this, it's very possible that we can see a bit of a retreat in where we've come with UFO openness. I was just told, I didn't read this, but Joel Achenbach, I think of the Washington Post, just today put out a really ridiculous op-ed piece or article on basically, look, UFOs are not aliens. Like, don't get excited, people. Typical nonsense you get out of the Washington Post, one of the most reprehensible publications in the country. But I think that's a signal as to where the establishment wants to go, which is a walking back.
Yeah.
So I think that's the tendency that we're going to have to be facing.
It's sad that they want to keep us as stupid as possible. I mean, I guess the only reason is because if you have an uninformed society, then you could essentially tell them what to do.
Yeah. Well, there's freedom. Freedom's an awesome thing for the people who have it, for the people who are willing to exercise it. But freedom can be great instability for those people who are creating a bureaucracy, an intricate bureaucracy to run every aspect of this world. I mean, we're moving in. You think about the world that we're creating. Again, I call this the fourth stage of humanity. So it's an everything's interconnected. That means everything's got to follow rules, got to follow protocols. It's like there's no more wiggle room in life. Everything's managed and monitored. And so that doesn't give a lot of room for freedom. So I think for those people who consider themselves our betters, our superiors, that is, the masters of our universe, the Davos crowd, the Bilderberg crowd, World Economic Forum people, and the money behind them, like there's no way that they want more freedom. They want less. They want to corral the masses.
Yeah.
But this idea existed even almost 100 years ago. What was it? Edward R. Murrow, I think, was that him? The bewildered herd. Oh, Walter Lippmann, that's the American journalist, used the phrase bewildered herd to describe the Americans of the 1930s and 40s. Like thinking, look, there's all these people, they think they've got these rights, but they're just poorly educated. They need to be managed.
Yeah.
So that idea, I think, has always been out there. So, what we had in this country, we had a middle class. It was a historically unique phenomenon, actually. I mean, you go through all of human history, it never existed where you had this entrepreneurial, industrious middle class is out to make money and invent things and come up with all these nifty little ideas to make the world a different place. Like that's a brief sliver of human history right there. Prior to this, I don't know, 1750 or so, it didn't really exist. I mean, there was a merchant class, has always been there, but like a really significant industrial entrepreneurial middle class, let's say for 200 years, a little more than 200 years. And I think we're seeing the end of that now. And we're seeing the end because essentially think of it this way. What the elite rulers of our world realized back then, all right, was that having this industrious, relatively free middle class was actually good for them too, because you had all these smart people who were suddenly liberated with their own genius to create things, but to create the railroad and create all these other inventions. Like the wealth of Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan, they all benefited from that as well. That was like in their interest to have some level of very smart people, like cut them loose and let them invent. And that's what America did. But I don't think that we're in that world anymore. I think that the need that they perceive of having a brilliant middle class may just be declining. I don't think they see that as necessary anymore. With algorithms increasingly doing intellectual labor, for example, and with corporations really controlling the intellectual output of the people who work for them, they may not really need all these smart, free people coming up with stuff anymore. So I think that's what part of what we're seeing in the world is that's going away. And again, that's also part of what I call this fourth stage of humanity. So I can't remember what your question was that prompted me to go down this road, but
there's another question here too, which I know the answer, but they want to hear you say it. Will China disclose before the United States?
Seriously doubt that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm totally with you on that one.
There's only a few countries that could jump ahead of the U.S. China, conceivably, and then obviously Russia is the obvious candidate of a nation that could do this ahead of the U.S. You have to rule out almost every other country in the world. They don't have the capability, and they're too much dominated by the United States, whether it's UK or Israel for that matter, or any of the South American countries. They're all. Remember when Snowden, came out with his revelations? He's talking about how the NSA was monitoring the phones of Angela Merkel and Dilma Rousseff, who was then the president of Brazil. And obviously, I'm sure many, many other national leaders. Like none of those national leaders have any that you cannot escape from the NSA. So if you wanted to do a disclosure ahead of the United States, you better be damn careful. You're gonna have to use like 2 cans and a string out in the middle of a field somewhere, and then hope they don't hear that. So, and you know, those countries are too embedded for the most part in the U.S. system. There's Pakistan and India. They collaborate. They're not completely dependent, but it would be very difficult for any of these nations to do it. Russia's different. So Russia has every bit as long a UFO history as the United States, by everything that we can see. We don't know as many of their cases, but when the Soviet Union broke apart, we did get a lot of those cases out, the so-called KGB blue files, which were very, like, some were just fascinating. So the Russians have the capability. There was a statement about 15 years ago by then President Dmitry Medvedev, who, for the most part, you have Putin, who was president, and Medvedev was his prime minister until recently. But for I guess it was a 4-year period, Medvedev was president. They switched.
Yeah, so they could switch so Putin could have a longer stay. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and that's when the United States destroyed Libya. Medvedev signed on to the Libyan. That's actually what got Putin so pissed off that he said, I'm going to be president again because you screwed up. And I think he was right. But anyway, so what Medvedev did at Davos in 2006, I think it was December of 2006, he's being interviewed. A lot of people listening, I'm sure, know what I'm about to say here. So there was a journalist that was talking to him at Davos World Economic Forum, and somehow, who the hell knows why, Medvedev starts talking about the aliens living in Russia. And when you hear him talk, like, you realize this guy's not talking about foreign nationals. He said, when you become president of Russia, you get two suitcases, one that's got all the nuclear codes and one that's got a list of all the aliens living in the country. And then he said a little bit more, which I cannot remember the details.
He mentioned that
there's a movie Men in Black.
Yeah,
he said, if you want to learn more, look at the movie Men in Black. And then everyone went, ha, 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 big joke. And the thing is, I don't think he was talking about Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones here. There is a Russian documentary called Men in Black. And I think it's all in how that whole thing was translated to the English-speaking audience. And I believe that is much more likely what he was talking about. The journalist who was interviewing him, she's like laughing, this nervous laughter that everyone often does when the subject of UFOs comes up. Yeah. But you look at Medvedev, he had a totally straight face. I mean, unless he was just totally trolling her. Yeah, maybe, but I don't think so. I don't think so, no.
I got the impression that the interview was over and he was on a hot mic. Whether he was on a hot mic and didn't know or not, but you're right. He knew. I mean, he was not joking to her, because this is Russia's state media too. I totally believe that, and I've watched it multiple times.
So the question is, would Russia do a disclosure ahead of the U.S.? I've often wondered, would the Russians do it? And I often think it's just possible that they could, as a move in the kind of pretty much open Cold War that's going on right now with them. I mean, the United States is an undeclared economic war against Russia. It's been that way since 2011. Since Putin really got pissed off that the United States took out Libya. That was actually the straw that broke his back. If you think before then, the Russians never interfered with U.S. Foreign policy. And they hadn't interfered with U.S. foreign policy since the several decades toward the end of the old Cold War under the Soviet, like maybe the 1970s, and might have been the last time that they really did. But Putin, as soon as he became president, after that, began to prevent the collapse of the nation of Syria, which really angered the Americans. John Kerry and Barack Obama were not happy about that. And then, of course, after the U.S. did the coup in Ukraine, they were just expecting to take Crimea as their prize, and the Crimeans were like, no way. And those people in Crimea, they're all Russian nationals. They're not Ukrainian. Crimea was always a Russian thing since the days of Catherine the Great. It only went to Ukraine in the Cold War under Khrushchev in 1954, when Khrushchev, a Ukrainian, said, "Crimea, a gift for Ukraine," or whatever he basically said. And it didn't matter at the time because it was all one country. Then when the Soviet Union broke apart, the Russians were like, "Oh my God, we need Crimea. That's our naval base." And so they worked out a lease arrangement with the Ukrainian government. It was all above board. Russia always had their troops there. And when the U.S. did the coup, engineered by people like Valerie Nuland and Jeffrey Priat, the Crimean people, they were like, we see Ukraine's going to go right down the toilet, which they absolutely were right. And they voted en masse to rejoin Russia. And Putin's like, okay. But anyway, my point is simply, I don't want to get off track here. That was actually when you see Putin defying the United States. And that's when you see the massive demonization of Russia starting at that time. And you see the undeclared war that the United States is doing with Russia. And so you've got a major geopolitical realignment happening. And as I've wondered, like, as a move in this Cold War, would Putin play either a 9/11 card or a UFO alien card? You know, because he has to know everything that happened at 9/11 for real, not the nonsense fairy tale that we've been told it is. And the same with UFOs, aliens.
I really would think so. Here's a super chat comment for you. It says, Dolan, with the last nuke test in the U.S. circa 94 being underground, do those affect them differently than above ground shots? And always enjoy, Dolan. That's what it says.
Thank you. I love when people call me Dolan. That's the best. I would think that it would. I mean, look, I don't know. I absolutely can't know. But I think that the upper atmospheric tests that were so prevalent in the 1950s and 60s, I mean, my God, it was just absolutely out of control. I would suspect that those would be even more dangerous. So my assumption is that the underground tests would probably be less disruptive, but I'm just guessing here. It's less disruptive, I think, well, actually, I don't know this, but I would think it might be less disruptive for the global environment. But someone could just prove me wrong on that, for all I know.
There's another comment for you. It's not a question. I think you'd appreciate it. This is from Distortion of Reality. It says, Richard's mind is like an encyclopedia. I agree. You are. You are. You're definitely one of those that I always come to ask. That's why we had such a great time. Nice. Hanging out all those times. Now, I know you only said you could do 90 minutes today, so I'm going to start to wrap this up. First of all, what's your take on Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, I know there's a few dissenters out there, but I think, I'm inclined to agree with what George Knapp and Colm Kelleher wrote years ago on that, which is that there's something very freaky about it. And that's everything we know about, that ranch, the Sherman family, which had it way back then.
Yeah.
I remember watching Jeremy Corbell's piece on Skinwalker just a couple of years ago. What made that great to me was actually the fact that he got George Knapp's old 1990s video about it, which was really what made it. And no offense against Jeremy. I know Jeremy, but my God, George's stuff from the 90s is just off the charts. And one of the things that they brought out there was like a very bizarre cattle mutilation case, if you remember that. Yep. Some of the details of that were absolutely nuts, bizarre. And then, cases of a parent portal.
Yeah, multiple. I know that's what intrigues me more than anything. The portals.
You hear Eric Davis talk about that. He was one of the lead scientists there, of course.
For NIDS, right?
Yeah, for NIDS, for National Institute of Discovery Science, along with Colm Kelleher.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of brief conversations with Hal Puthoff about Skinwalker Ranch. Hal wasn't directly there, but he knew everything that was going on there. Everything, as a board member of NIDS. So I could tell you those people are baffled by what was happening there.
Yeah.
So I think there's something very unusual. It could be like a place where if you think of a veil between our reality and some other reality, is that what it is? It's what ancient people believe. It could be true.
I'm working on an interview with Mr. Fugal. It'll happen in the coming months, but I've interviewed the person from the Stardust Ranch. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Not as much, no.
It's basically the Skinwalker Ranch of Arizona.
That's Brandon Fugal. He owns that as well, or
no. It's
different
John Edmonds. He's a psychiatrist, retired, with his wife being retired FBI. He's killed 17 aliens with a sword. It's so
really?
bizarre.
For real?
Yeah,
seriously.
This is no joke. There's photographs.
With a sword.
He's even sent the tissue samples to a scientist who called him after testing and said, "Hey, you have the breakthrough evidence. This is real." Scientist dies. His lab blows up. The evidence is gone. And then a week later, his wife dies. Anyway.
I'm a little, I don't really know what I think about that. I do remember talking years ago to Daryl Sims about something like that. I don't know if it's the same case or not. Daryl actually talked about a guy with a sword fighting an alien. And back then too, I was like, are you for real, Daryl? It seems so implausible to me. But if this is an actual case, then all I would say is he should just document everything that he's able to and make his case as well as he can.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'm just scared to go on that property right now because I don't want those 8-foot black creatures with red eyes and no neck to come walking around my bed. There's so many reasons that want me to stay as far away from that property. Anyhow, let me throw a couple things out there and then I'll end the show. Let me see if this is a comment for you. Well, let's see here. Okay, this is from Goofon. It says, Dolan using another leaked info for obtaining info on the UAPTF task force, secret UAP files. Let's not make it another PPV dollars for disclosure event. Whatever happened to free info for the greater cause, whatever, if you got that.
Look, man, I don't know what people want from me. Sometimes people will come to me and they're like, you cannot use my name. What am I going to do? Am I going to blow up everyone's confidentiality because someone says I'm supposed to do that? And I'm not, what pay-per-view? I mean, I did an online conference earlier this year and I did one a year ago. It's like, if they got a problem with that, then, sue me. What am I going to say? But as far as the information that I personally put out, I put out everything that I'm able to. I've got a website that there's a shitload of free information on there for anyone to go see. I'm not stopping him or anyone else. But in terms of confidential information that comes my way, look, I mean, there was, I think he's talking about the task force, the so-called classified task force conclusions that someone did send to me. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't anything confirmed. In fact, that was given to me 5 minutes literally before I went on live on my program that night. And I just had to decide, like, do I put this out there or do I not? Do I keep it to myself or not? So I thought, I'll put it out there. I put it on my YouTube channel. And essentially, I don't even know if it's true. And I said I didn't know if it was true, by the way. The thing was, it was claims about, trying to remember, I want to get the details right from memory, but that there were various technologies that were being connected to these UAP and technologies that we knew we were developing at I think in Tonopah or in Nevada. Mm-hmm. And then the conclusion is that none of those had left that area. So those were not able to explain the UAP sightings off the coast of California. I think that's what the leak said. That was leaked to me. So I put it out there. And I mean, I know the person who gave it to me. I know him very well. He's a friend of mine. He himself is pretty well connected. And so, I don't, if it's true, I don't know if it's true. I just thought I'd put it out there. But I'll give you an example of the difficulty that I often find myself in. So when the Wilson Davis notes leaked out in June of 2019, was that? Yeah, 2 years ago. As I've said to many people, I was personally shown several pages of those notes in 2006.
Oh, wow. 15 years ago.
That's right. And in fact, this is confirmable. Like, first of all, I talked about that whole information in lectures in 07, 08, 09, 2010, and beyond. And in fact, in one interview I did on July 1st, 2007 with the Paracast with Gene Steinberg, I actually used the phrase, not of this earth, not made by human hands. I actually literally said that. And I was working right off of my memory of the notes that I had read without mentioning the fact that I had read the notes, because I had to be careful. And this brings me to my point. Those mm-hmm. notes are shown to me by someone very, 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 very close to the whole Wilson Davis scenario. But I've not given up this man's name, and I will not give his name up because he came to me in total confidence. And after those notes were revealed, I begged him.
You could reveal his
name. I begged him. I said, look, will you just please, for posterity's sake, like, what are you waiting for? let's just get this out there. All right. I'd like to be able to use your name as the person who showed me these notes in 06. And he just said, no, that would be very, very destructive to me on every level. So like, what am I going to do? I don't want to, I'm not going to throw these people under the bus. So I don't want to tease the public. I hate that. But on the other hand, when you have people coming to you in absolute confidence, and it's not just him, I've had a number of people who've done that. I can't and I won't break that confidence. I wish it could be different, believe me, but I'm just not going to do that.
Respectable, and that's how you get more confidential sources to you. Okay, here's a comment and a question for you. This is from Michael J. Schumann. Richard Dolan, you have been very generous with your depth of knowledge to the general public, especially during these podcasts you appear as guests on. Thank you. Next one is a question for you.
Well, that's it. So thanks very much.
This is Mark H.
It's not a matter of being generous. Honestly, I love the subject. I love talking about it.
Me too.
And if there's a good interviewer who can get information out, it's easier for me. So, but yeah.
Luis Elizondo said there was something major in the next month coming out. Any idea on what that is and from where the information is coming from?
I've heard the same thing, and I do not know. Although when I heard him talk about this, I had the distinct impression that he was not happy about this development. Now that could just be my misinterpretation, but that's how I read what he said. And I asked myself, like, what could be the development that he doesn't like? And I don't know, a Putin disclosure would be.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's it. I'm absolutely not saying that, but I had this feeling, and it's just my own gut feeling, that he was not happy about it. But the fact is, I have zero inside knowledge about this. I've talked to Lou Elizondo. I think we seem to get along just fine, but I'm not in his inner circle. He doesn't, he's so busy. He's like, he can't afford to have everyone in his inner circle, and I'm not in it. So I don't know.
I guess time will tell. Now, give me a couple of minutes so I could say a few things, and then I will come back to you for your final thought, where people can find you, and then please stick around for after. First of all, everyone, if you haven't gotten yourself a MOVA Globe, see, they rotate just by light. They're really bitching. You can get 10% off just by going to movaglobes.com and use coupon code Dr. J Radio Live. Now, throughout this stream, I've dropped the minds.com link. I highly suggest you get off Facebook, go somewhere where you could speak your mind without being censored, and remember, it pays you just to use it. Literally, you could put your bank account straight in for it, and you'll get deposited. I think it's every month or every week. Get all your friends to use that same referral code. Bring everybody you know here. Also, guest requests, please email drjradioliveguests@gmail.com or contact my social media manager, Pam Vrettenberg. Another thing I just found out during the stream, very sad because he's a very good friend, is Paul Hellyer sadly has passed away. So may he rest in peace. And finally, my websites, there's two of them. There's drjradiolive.com and drjradiolive.com/old site. I'm taking a poll on which one of the two all you guys out there, want me to continue to use for the future, because since 60% of things I have put up here have been banned, demonetized, removed, etc., I need to create a backup. Final thing is, there's a poll. I'm trying to rank all the guests for 3 different books, one on UFOs, one on other topics, like politics, etc. So whether it includes Mr. Dolan, Linda Moulton Howe, Lou Elizondo, or people like Edgar Mitchell, Uri Geller, Roger Stone, Jerome Corsi, I'm leaving that on you fine people to tell me who. Now, with that being said, Richard, thank you so very much, and I can't wait for us to do this again. Let's make sure it's not 5 years. Let's try to get it done before the end of the year, if possible.
It was a lot of fun, John. Totally enjoyed it. Great question from the listeners too.
Yeah, and I promise you they'll be back and more. There's even another comment here. Richard, keep up the good work, and something thumbs up, expose them. Now tell people where they can find your book, what days they can hear your streams, and I'll put your link here.
So my main action is on my website. It's called richarddolanmembers.com. It's easy to get to. I've got members content. That's just, you got to join for that. It's cheap, $7 a month. Like, I try to put out a lot of useful content for that. I hope people think it's worthwhile, but there's a lot of free content there every single week as well. Lots that I do there. But I do a members live stream not live stream. I'll do a members video podcast every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I call it my weekly fireside chat podcast. I just sit down and I just talk about whatever's on my mind. I'll usually do a couple of like an article or a podcast in addition to that per week for that. On my YouTube channel, which I have Richard Dolan YouTube, I do the Richard Dolan show, not every week anymore, but like maybe a couple of times a month. I'll put out new shows of that I still do want to keep busy with that. And that's it. And I work on my, my writing projects. My recent book, The Alien Agendas, that's on Amazon. You can go to my site and it links from there, but it's basically my shortest book. I think it's my shortest. This is it. I love it. Oh,
wow. Yeah,
it's only, it's about 250 pages, 244 pages, actually.
Because your first 3 books were a lot longer, especially UFOs, National Security State, but they were amazing reads. I mean, I read those multiple times. The first time I literally did not put it down until I read it all. So
I'm flattered. Well, I wanted this to be a good read too, and basically I subtitle it a speculative analysis of those visiting Earth. So it was just first time really in my career where I tried to sit down and puzzle out what I believed is the situation of these other beings. Like, what do I really think they are at this point? Do I think they have an agenda? And so I try to do that and then explain why I think they're here at this time.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts you want before we go? And by the way, hang on after we finish.
Yes, sir. Final thoughts. Look, I mean, I realize like a lot of the things that I find myself saying about the world sound absolutely bleak and hopeless, but I don't feel that way in my own life. And I firmly believe that we have a human spirit. And the more and more I study this phenomenon of UFOs and potential aliens, the more I actually believe and want to lean into the fact that we're human beings. I don't want to be a transhumanist. I don't want to be something. I just want to be a human being, and I want to be proud of actually all that we have accomplished as a species. I think it's important for us to remember our history as a species and who we are.
Agreed. Very well said. And with that being said, I guess we are officially done. Everybody, I'll catch you on the flip side. Be sure to check out Richard's website, his books, and of course, his YouTube channel. And now me and him are